said that the perfect poem is funny and serious at the same time. The reader doesn't know which it is. The way the dead in a Collins poem might both row themselves slowly through eternity in glass-bottom boats, and also, silencing their oars as hunters do, wait like parents for us to close our eyes. The dead sound both like the leisured class pictured in Impressionist paintings on the front of phone books and stalkers, in versions of everything parental, eagerly awaiting our final sleep. What is the source of this disturbance we feel? What people call in a Collins poem its mystery or its surprise, its strange and not entirely hospitable hospitality. It's more a pitch than a paradox, a sense that one can dangle a line of discursive thought in a seemingly clear stream and haul up unintended and strangely expressive experiences. The line between what is trivial or commonplace and what we call important keeps shifting, and the significance of our smallest, least remarkable actions shift with it. Another way to get at the peculiarly satisfying pitch of Collins is to say that it is the vertiginous sensation of funneling rapidly from the wide gate to the narrow. His poems begin with a call out to the casual, to the not quite attentive, as though he were saying that he was only having a sandwich with the visitor from Porlock, minding his own business when, damn, if Kubla Khan didn't interrupt him. There are no trumpets at the beginning of a Collins poem. No seals will be broken or graves opened, no show of stalking capital P poetry. Any announcements made will be the sort you might overhear at a party or on the subway. Unintentionally revelatory questions and musings that a person would tidy up and make more logical, more solid, more like the big questions of poetry and heavy boots if he assumed that everything he spoke was going into a book, cut into breaths and heartbeats. Collins lets it stand. It's not always flattering to remember we thought like this, reveal this much, even if it is put to us amiably, excessively. As we follow his associative leaps and metaphors, which, as Tony Hoagland has said, always return in a poem like the hulls of seagoing ships, with unintended barnacles and seaweed stuck fast below the waterline. We sense something done and decided, hidden in what seemed playful, something we hadn't quite intended to admit. We remember there are no accidents in dreams. But it's too late. The door is shut behind us. We've recognized everything in the room and can't very well pretend that we don't know where we are, although we're unsure of what comes next. And what comes next is one of the presiding angels of anxiety floating about these poems, death without its capital. When the poet is very pure, he pictures himself as a skeleton at a typewriter, and death moves into the future like the sharp tip of a pen moving across an empty page. It's that close, lifting its scythe from the trunk once it stopped you on a back road. The dead poets revolve gently, even affectionately, so Collins says, and I believe him, when we read their poems. It might be that we are hearing a man talking his way out of dying, not as Keats might have done it, trying to take its picture and stop its hand, but the way we talk ourselves out of a traffic ticket, making out that we're on good terms with our enforcer, that we are in the awkward, inconvenient human predicament together. And surely people of goodwill can sort it out without money actually changing hands. Except one can feel it dawning on the speaker that he's trying to humor the humorless. And so that peculiar sense of what one interviewer called charm and chill. We remember there is such a thing as a last laugh, even as Collins refills our glasses, directs our attention to the hum of bees in the garden, the contents of his desk, or the peculiar migrations of allegorical abstractions this season. One image suggests another until we aren't quite sure what's close and what's far. Death might be miles from here, and we're in good company. He'll miss us if we go. Not, Collins reminds us in the poem Flight of the Reader, like I have a crush on you, and instead of writing my 5-paragraph essay, I'm sailing paper airplanes across the room at you. It's not that I can't wait for the lunch bell to see your face again. It's not like that, not exactly. And we find ourselves laughing again. Billy Collins is the author of 7 collections of poetry, including Questions About Angels, a winner of the National Poetry Series, The Art of Drowning, Picnic Lightning, and Sailing Alone Around the Room. He's a recipient of fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation, was a distinguished professor of English at Lehman College at the City University of New York, and a visiting writer at Sarah Lawrence College. He served as Poet Laureate of the United States from 2001 to 2002. Love child of Wallace Stevens and Richard Brodigan. Ladies and gentlemen, Lily Collins.
Thank you for that thoughtful introduction. I love the way you weave my lines in and out of your comments, and you're a nice big audience. I like to see that. Thank you all for coming. Well, let me. I'm going to read a couple of the. I'm going to start by reading a few poems that have that establish, I think, sort of the coordinates of the poetry exchange. And the first one I'm going to read is about the reader, and then I'm going to read a poem kind of about poets and what they do, and then I'm going to read a poem about poetry itself. So you'll see that I'm violating all of this MFA advice that you're not supposed to write about poetry, which is basically, I think, all I write about most of the time. But I start out this poem with a quote from Yeats, and this is Yeats in, well, some would call it his disagreeable mode, or his equestrian mode, in other words, delivered from his high horse. A great poet, but a buzzkill in many ways. Yeats delivers his view on how poetry should be delivered when he says, "A poet never speaks directly as to someone at the breakfast table." And this poem takes issue with that. It's called Portrait of the Reader with a Bowl of Cereal. Every morning I sit across from you at the same small table, the sun all over the breakfast things, curve of a blue and white pitcher, a dish of berries, me in a sweatshirt or robe, you invisible. Most days we are suspended over a deep pool of silence. I stare straight through you or look out the window at the garden, the powerful sky, a cloud passing behind a tree. There is no need to pass the toast, the pot of jam, or pour you a cup of tea, and I can hide behind the paper and rotate in its drum of calamitous news. But some days I may notice a little door swinging open in the morning air, and maybe the tea leaves of some dream will be stuck to the china slope of the hour. Then I will lean forward, elbows on the table, with something to tell you, and you will look up, as always, your spoon dripping milk, ready to listen. That's a rather idealized image of the reader. I don't know, do you know that poem by Galway Kinnell called Oatmeal, where he has breakfast with John Keats? He just says he eats oatmeal every morning, but it's not good for the soul to eat oatmeal alone. So he conjures up people like Keats to have oatmeal with. And this is a poem about the reader then. Well, that was a poem about the reader. I'm getting ahead of myself, or behind myself. Come in and sit down. This is a poem about poets. It's about kind of a ritual activity that I imagine poets go through. And it's called, because it's about ritual and routine, it's simply called Monday. The birds are in their trees, the toast is in the toaster, and the poets are at their windows. They are at their windows in every section of the tangerine of earth, the Chinese poets looking up at the moon, the American poets gazing out at the pink and blue ribbons of sunrise. The clerks are at their desks, the miners are down in their mines, and the poets are looking out their windows, maybe with a cigarette, a cup of tea, and maybe a flannel shirt or a bathrobe is involved. The proofreaders are playing the ping-pong game of proofreading, glancing back and forth from page to page. The chefs are dicing celery and potatoes, and the poets are at their windows because It is their job, for which they are paid nothing, every Friday afternoon. Which window, it hardly seems to matter, though many have a favorite, for there is always something to see. A bird grasping a thin branch, the headlights of a taxi rounding a corner, those two boys in wool caps angling across the street. The fishermen bob in their boats, the linemen climb their round poles, the barbers wait by their mirrors and chairs, and the poets continue to stare at the cracked bird bath or a limb knocked down by the wind. By now it should go without saying that what the oven is to the baker and the berry-stained blouse to the dry cleaner, so the window is to the poet. Just think, before the invention of the window, the poets would have to put on a jacket and a winter hat to go outside, or remain indoors with only a wall to stare at. And when I say a wall, I do not mean a wall with striped wallpaper and a sketch of a cow in a frame. I mean a cold wall of fieldstones, the wall of the medieval sonnet, the original woman's heart of stone, the stone caught in the throat of her poet lover. I have a book coming out a little later this year, and it's called The Trouble with Poetry and Other Poems. I thought that was funny too. So this is the title poem. It's called The Trouble with Poetry. The trouble with poetry, I realized as I walked along a beach one night, cold Florida sand under my bare feet, a show of stars in the sky. The trouble with poetry is that it encourages the writing of more poetry. More guppies crowding the fish tank, more baby rabbits hopping out of their mothers into the dewy grass. And how will it ever end? Unless the day finally arrives when we have compared everything in the world to everything else in the world. And there is nothing left to do then but quietly close our notebooks and sit with our hands folded on our desks. Poetry fills me with joy, and I rise like a feather in the wind. Poetry fills me with sorrow, and I sink like a chain flung from a bridge. But mostly poetry fills me with the urge to write poetry, to sit in the dark and wait for a little flame to appear at the tip of my pencil. And along with that, a longing to steal, to break into the poems of others with a flashlight and a ski mask. And what an unmerry band of thieves we are. Cut purses, common shoplifters. I thought to myself, as a cold wave swirled around my ankles, and the lighthouse moved its megaphone over the sea, which is an image I stole directly from Lawrence Ferlinghetti. To be perfectly honest for a moment, the bicycling poet of San Francisco, whose little amusement park of a book I used to carry in a side pocket of my uniform up and down the treacherous halls of high school. Thank you. So that was petty theft, and I confess to that. And then there are other, throughout all of these poems, there are crimes being committed that I will not admit to, but this next poem, this begins and got going with a more flagrant act of stealing. And that is, the history of the little brief history of the poem is that I found in a magazine a love poem by a poet I have never heard of before, and I hope never to hear from in just said he lived in Belgium, so I thought, "Phew, that's good, okay." It's far enough away. Well, his poem is a love poem, and it's addressed to the beloved. And what he does in the poem from beginning to end is what poets have been doing for centuries in Western love poetry. He compares his beloved to all kinds of things in nature and not, but basically begins and ends just by comparing her to the things he can think of. And apparently he thought that, Freud asks that kind of demeaning question, what do women want? And this and other poets, I believe, think that what women want are similes. That was not just to keep them happy. So anyway, I take the first couple of lines of his poem and I just rewrote the poem for him. Thank you very much. So he begins by addressing the beloved, presumably gazing into her peerless eyes and saying to her, "You are the bread and the knife, the crystal goblet and the wine." And I call this poem Litany. You are the bread and the knife, the crystal goblet and the wine. You are the dew on the morning grass and the burning wheel of the sun. You are the white apron of the baker and the marsh bird suddenly in flight. However, you are not the wind in the orchard, the plums on the counter, or the house of cards. And you are certainly not the pine-scented air. There is no way you are the pine-scented air. It is possible that you are the fish under the bridge, maybe even the pigeon on the general's head, but you are not even close to being the field of cornflowers at dusk. And a quick look in the mirror will show that you are neither the boots in the corner nor the boat asleep in its boathouse. It might interest you to know, speaking of the plentiful imagery of the world, that I am the sound of rain on the roof. I also happen to be the shooting star, the evening paper blowing down an alley, and the basket of chestnuts on the kitchen table. I am also the moon in the trees and the blind woman's teacup. But don't worry, I am not the bread and the knife. You are still the bread and the knife. You will always be the bread and the knife. Not to mention the crystal goblet and somehow the wine. China, there's a legendary figure. His name is Kang Yi, I think that's the way you might pronounce it. And he's the man who, according to this legend, is said to have invented writing. And according to the legend, he invented writing having observed the tracks of birds. And that's how the first characters were drawn in imitation of these bird tracks. So I wrote a poem that was stimulated by that. And it's a pretty recent poem. I'm calling it Ornithography, which I don't think that's in the dictionary. I really didn't bother to look it up. I should. But if it were in the dictionary, it should mean the writings of birds. So I kind of doubt that it's in the. I'd be very impressed if it were in the dictionary. That's what it should mean anyway. So anyway, ornithography. A light snow last night, and now the earth falls open to a new page. A cold wind is breaking up the clouds. Children wait for their yellow bus in a huddle. And under the feeder, some birds are busy writing poems, short stories, and letters to their mothers. A crow is working on an editorial. That chickadee is compiling a list, and the robin so prolific this morning, these expressive little creatures, and each with an alphabet of only 2 letters. A far cry from me, here in silence behind a window, as silent as they are whenever they take to flight, having nothing more to say. So I figured when they're flying, they've just run out of stop writing. They're just flying now. What a life, though, just writing and flying. Here's a poem about, it's really a poem about expectations and how they can go wrong, or how basically they often never are fulfilled. It's called The Order of the Day. And there's a window in here, too. There's lots of windows. A morning after a week of rain, and the sun shot down through the branches and into the tall, bare windows, the brindled cat rolled over on his back, and I could hear you in the kitchen grinding coffee beans into a powder. Everything seemed especially vivid because I knew we were all going to die. First the cat, then you, then me, then somewhat later the sun itself was the order I was envisioning. But then again, you never really know. The cat had a fiercely healthy look. His coat so bristling and electric, I wondered what you had been feeding him, and what you had been feeding me. As I turned a corner of our house and beheld you out there on the sunny deck, lost in exercise, running in place, knees lifted high, skin glistening, and that toothy, immortal-looking smile of yours. I'll read. I want to read a poem about a dog, since I mentioned the cat in there. Don't want to get the other side annoyed, so keep the balance here. This poem about my dog. I call it Dharma because I'm trying to get at some potential spiritual zone that she might inhabit. She seems that. I mean, she's never lost a staring contest with me. I know that. So that's why the poem is called Dharma. The way the dog trots out the front door every morning without a hat or an umbrella, without any money or the keys to her doghouse, never fails to fill the saucer of my heart with milky admiration. Who provides a finer example of a life without encumbrance? Thoreau, in his curtainless hut, with a single plate, a single spoon, Gandhi with his staff and his knotted diapers. Off she goes into the material world with nothing but her brown coat and her modest blue collar, following only her wet nose, the twin portals of her steady breathing, followed only by the plume of her tail. If only she did not shove the cat aside every morning and eat all his food. What a model of self-containment she would be. What a paragon of earthly detachment. If only she were not so eager for a rub behind the ears, so acrobatic in her welcomes. If only I were not her God. If you write poems about such subjects as domestic pets, even though it might be a goldfish or a gerbil, you can still be accused, I think, of kind of manipulating the sympathies of the reader. So I wrote this poem to kind of balance that out. It's called The Revenant, and that means, as you probably know, it's a spirit, a ghost. A revenant is a spirit that comes back to pay you a visit. sit in a chair to eat, a napkin on your lap, a knife in your hand. I would have run away, but I was too weak. A trick you taught me while I was learning to sit and heal, and greatest of insults, shake hands without a hand. I admit the sight of the leash would excite me, but only because it meant I was about to smell things you had never touched. You do not want to believe this, but I have no reason to lie. I hated the car, the rubber toys, disliked your friends, and worse, your relatives. The jingling of my tags drove me mad. You always scratched me in the wrong place. All I ever wanted from you was food and water in my metal bowls. While you slept, I watched you breathe as the moon rose in the sky. It took all my strength not to raise my head and howl. Now, I am free of the collar, the yellow raincoat, monogrammed sweater, the absurdity of your lawn. And that is all you need to know about this place, except what you've already supposed and are glad it did not happen sooner, that everyone here can read and write, the dogs in poetry, the cats and all the others in prose. Continues my afternoon of prose bashing. A little subject matter goes a long way, someone said about writing, and I know when I was a younger poet I had so many things to say, and then I realized that all these things had been said hundreds of times before, and then I was struck with the notion that I had nothing to say. And at that point, my poetry really improved because I didn't feel I had to carry the furniture of all this subject matter around with me. I'm proud to say that some of these poems are about very, very little, and this one I think is a pretty good example of that. It's called The Long Day. In the morning, I ate a banana like a young ape, and I worked on a poem called Nocturne. In the afternoon, I opened the mail with a short kitchen knife, and when dusk began to fall, I took off my clothes, put on Sweetheart of the Rodeo, and soaked in a claw-footed bathtub. I closed my eyes and thought about the alphabet, the letters filing out of the halls of kindergarten to become literature. If the British call Z, Z, I wondered, why not call B, bed, and D, dead? And why does Z, which looks like the fastest letter, come at the very end? Unless they are all moving east when we are facing north in our chairs. It was then that I heard a clap of thunder and the dogs barking, and the claw-footed bathtub took one step forward, or was it backward, I had to ask, as I reached for a faraway towel. Here's a few, two or three maybe short poems. This is a poem also stimulated by just something I read and wrote out this sentence. I don't know, the sentence really moved me. It was an article, kind of a review of a history of printing, I guess, in the TLS. The sentence is this. It says, "It has been calculated that each copy of the Gutenberg Bible required the skins of 300 sheep." So it's a rather short poem called Flock. I can see them squeezed into the holding pen, behind the stone building where the printing press is housed, all of them squirming around to find a little room and looking so much alike it would be nearly impossible to count them, and there is no telling which one will carry the news that the Lord is a shepherd, one of the few things they already know. And then, this is also rather short. It's called Constellations. Constellations. Yes, that's Orion over there. The three studs of the belt clearly lined up just off the horizon. And if you turn around, you can see Gemini, very visible tonight, the twins looking off into space as usual. That cluster, a little higher in the sky, is Cassiopeia, sitting in her astral chair, if I'm not mistaken. And directly overhead, isn't that Virginia Woolf, slipping along the River Ouse in her inflatable canoe? See the wide-brimmed hat, and there, the outline of the paddle, raised and dripping stars. I just read somewhere that that was the river that she drowned herself in, of course, and but prior to that, not that day, I presume, but that she had this, I don't think I did that. That should have happened in the middle of the Constellations Club. Turn it into suddenly becomes a planetarium. But anyway, I just heard that she had this inflatable canoe, and I just had to get that into a poem. Well, another poem or two that are very short. This is a rather short love poem called Carrie, C-A-R-R-Y, not I-E, like the blood-soaked horror movie victim there. C-A-R-R-Y. I want to carry you, and for you to carry me, the way voices are said to carry over water. Just this morning on the shore, I could hear two people talking quietly in a rowboat on the far side of the lake. They were talking about fishing. Then one changed the subject, and I swear they began talking about you. And this is another fairly short poem. It's based on something you hear on the radio, a kind of an NPR type announcement that you hear variations of this again and again. It's called, the name of the poem is Surprise. This, according to the voice on the radio, the host of a classical music program, no less, this is the birthday of Vivaldi. He would be 325 years old today, quite bent over, I would imagine, and not able to see much through his watery eyes. Surely he would be deaf by now, the clothes flaking off him, hair pitiably sparse. But we would throw a party for him anyway, a surprise party, where everyone would hide behind the furniture to listen for the tap of his cane on the pavement and the sound of that dry, persistent cough. Whenever I hear, Mendelssohn would be 293 years old today, I just picture Mendelssohn at that age. I always have done that. And I have to kind of, shoo that away. You don't want to carry that around with you too long. Well, this poem is based on a photograph that keeps coming up as that announcement keeps coming up on the radio. A photograph you see in newspapers that I've been seeing title of the poem is Building with Its Face Blown Off. How suddenly the private is revealed in a bombed-out city. How the blue and white striped wallpaper of a second-story bedroom is now exposed to the lightly falling snow, as if the room had answered the explosion, wearing only its striped pajamas. Some neighbors and soldiers poke around in the rubble below and stare up at the hanging staircase, the portrait of a grandfather, a door dangling from a single hinge, and the bathroom looks almost embarrassed by its uncovered ochre walls, the twisted mess of its plumbing, the sink sinking to its knees, the ripped shower curtain, the torn goldfish trailing bubbles. It's like a dollhouse view, as if a child on its knees could reach in and pick up the bureau, straighten the picture. Or it could be a room on a stage in a theater, in a play with no characters, no dialogue or audience, no beginning, no middle or end, just the broken furniture in the street, a shoe among the cinder blocks, a light snow still falling on a distant steeple and on people crossing a bridge that still stands. And beyond that, crows in a tree, the statue of a leader on a horse, and clouds that look like smoke. And even farther on, much farther on, in another country, on a blanket under a shade tree, a man pouring wine into 2 glasses, and a woman sliding out the wooden pegs of a wicker hamper filled with bread, cheese, and several kinds of olives. So. Here's a poem that got going just by stumbling across a word, which really the beginning of the poem is quick to tell you about. It's a poem that would be probably, in Japanese, in haiku, there's usually a season word or a word that something in bloom or not in bloom that tips you off to the season. And if this poem had a season, it would be mid to late summer. The poem is called The Lanyard. The other day, as I was ricocheting slowly off the pale blue walls of this room, bouncing from typewriter to piano, from bookshelf to an envelope lying on the floor, I found myself in the L section of the dictionary, where my eyes fell upon the word lanyard. No cookie, nibbled by a French novelist, could send one more suddenly into the past. A past where I sat at a workbench at a camp by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift for my mother. I had never seen anyone use a lanyard, or wear one if that's what you did with them. But that did not keep me from crossing strand over strand, again and again, until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room, lifted teaspoons of medicine to my lips, set cold face cloths on my forehead, and then led me out into the airy light and taught me to walk and swim, and I in turn presented her with a lanyard. Here are thousands of meals, she said, and here is clothing, and a good education, and here is your lanyard. Which I made with a little help from a counselor. Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones, and teeth, and 2 clear eyes to read the world, she whispered. And here I said, is the lanyard I made at camp. And here, I wish to say to her now, is a smaller gift, not the archaic truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she lifted the two-tone lanyard from my hands, I was as sure as a boy could be that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even. You're just very proud of yourself at that age, your own two little hands. When I was at camp, there was just that and a pot holder. That was it. It's my first experience with a dilemma. Restless in my cabin. Pot holder. Which would she like? Which is easier to make? No, which is harder to make? I knew kids who went to, let's say, better camps, more privileged camps, and they would come home with more exotic gifts, handicrafts for their parents, including ceramics. This was really a dividing line between the type of camp you went to, whether you had a kiln or not. And I attended a kiln-free camp. Just as well, because these presents that my more privileged friends made were equally useless as the lanyard. One would be, you'd make like an ashtray for Dad, which would be just flat as a board. Just a flat piece of ceramic. And, or you could make a cup. But these would be these hideously misshapen cups out of some kind of Salvador Dali painting. And no handle, of course, because you were too dumb to put a handle on it. And one mother who had a lot of experience in this confided in me that these misshapen cups are known popularly among mothers as lanyard holders. Replaced it with the a very fairly literal poem based just on a real observation that in one of the functions of writing, I suppose, is just as a preservative. I love Yeats's line. I love some of his lines. He says, "All that is personal will rot unless it is packed in salt and ice." And by that, I think he means rhyme and meter, but he's talking about poetry as a kind of amber in which memories can be preserved. And the poem is called Love. The boy at the far end of the train car kept looking behind him as if he were afraid or expecting someone. And then she appeared in the glass door of the forward car, and he rose and opened the door and let her in, and she entered the car carrying a large black case in the unmistakable shape of a cello. She looked like an angel with a high forehead and somber eyes, and her hair was tied up behind her neck with a black bow. And because of all that, he seemed a little awkward in his happiness to see her, whereas she was simply there, perfectly existing as a creature with a soft face who played the cello. And the reason I am writing this on the back of a manila envelope, now that they have left the train together, is to tell you that when she turned to lift the large, delicate cello onto the overhead rack, I saw him looking up at her and what she was doing, the way the eyes of saints are painted when they are looking up at God, when he is doing something remarkable, something that identifies him as God. school, this unnamed Holy Cross school, which shall go Holy Cross unnamed. We studied a lot of medieval scholasticism. We studied a lot of medieval philosophy, largely written by Thomas Aquinas. And one of this poem begins with a question that was made up to sort of make fun of the kind of the rationalistic presumptuousness of that kind of philosophy that said that you could basically figure out the deepest mysteries if you just knew the right syllogisms and could put them in the right order. It's called Questions About Angels. Of all the questions you might want to ask about angels, the only one you ever hear is how many can dance on the head of a pin. No curiosity about how they pass the eternal time besides circling the throne, chanting in Latin, or delivering a crust of bread to a hermit on earth, or guiding a boy and girl across a rickety wooden bridge. Do they fly through God's body and come out singing? Do they swing like children from the hinges of the spirit world, saying their names backwards and forwards? Do they sit alone in little gardens, changing colors? What about their sleeping habits, the fabric of their robes, their diet of unfiltered divine light? What goes on inside their luminous heads? Is there a wall these tall presences can look over and see hell? If an angel fell off a cloud, would he leave a hole in a river? And would the hole float along endlessly, filled with the silent letters of every angelic word? If an angel delivered the mail, would he arrive in a blinding rush of wings, or just as soon the appearance of the regular mailman and whistle up the driveway, reading the postcards? No, the medieval theologians control this court. The only question you ever hear is about the little dance floor on the head of a pin, where halos are meant to converge and drift invisibly. It is designed to make us think in millions, in billions, to make us run out of numbers and collapse into infinity. But perhaps the answer is simply one female angel dancing alone in her stocking feet, a small jazz combo working in the background. She sways like a branch in the wind, her beautiful eyes closed, and the tall, thin bassist leans over to glance at his watch, because she has been dancing forever, and now it is very late, even for musicians. This is a poem about another poem. It's called Japan because it's about a haiku. And you know these 17-syllable forms. It's one of the nicer little boxes you can work in. People talk about thinking outside the box, but poets usually, or writers, like to think inside the box. The box could be a sonnet or a haiku, or just some unnamed box, and but the joy is really working within its little boundaries. And so I like to write haiku. I used to write one every morning, and I still try sometimes to come back from a walk with something that's 17 syllables long, maybe not very good, but when I would get a few of these haiku together that I thought were decent, I would send them off to a magazine called Modern Haiku, which seems like the right place to send a haiku that is written in modern times. And occasionally, this editor prints some of these haiku. And so just a little while ago, I got an envelope in the mail from Modern Haiku, and inside the envelope there was a check for $25. And I'd won the Haiku of the Month contest without even entering it, really. And I thought, that's nice. I mean, to get a little something back for your poetry, and I thought, $25 is not a lot these days. But then I quickly divided it by 17, and I was making $1.48 a syllable, which is really an extremely high rate of pay for anyone. Now, after the reading, some of you are going to probably say, what was that haiku that won the money? So I'm going to tell you the haiku so you won't have to say that. This is my prize-winning haiku. 17 syllables. Midwinter evening, alone at the sushi bar, just me and this eel. Such a pathetic picture, isn't it? You feel sorry for the eel and me, winter. Ogden Nash has a poem, a little poem. He says, I like eels, except at meals, and how they feels. So I'll read a couple more poems, and this one is the poem called Japan, that focuses on haiku. Japan. Today, I passed the time reading a favorite haiku, saying a few words over and over. It feels like eating the same small, perfect grape again and again. I walk through the house reciting it and leave its letters falling through the air of every room. I stand by the big silence of the piano and say it. I say it in front of a painting of the sea. I tap out its rhythm on an empty shell. I listen to myself saying it, then I say it without listening, then I hear it without saying it. And when the dog looks up at me, I kneel down on the floor and whisper it into each of his long white ears. It's the one about the one-ton temple bell with the moth sleeping on its surface. And every time I say it, I feel the excruciating pressure of the moth on the surface of the iron bell. When I say it at the window, the bell is the world, and I am the moth resting there. When I say it into the mirror, I am the heavy bell, and the moth is life with its papery wings. And later, when I say it to you in the dark, you are the bell, and I am the tongue of the bell, ringing you, and the moth has flown from its line and moves like a hinge in the air above our bed. Here's another. I want to get this short poem. I think it's only 8 lines. It's called No Time. No Time. In a rush this weekday morning, I tap the horn as I speed past the cemetery where my parents lie buried side by side under a smooth slab of granite. Then, all day long, I think of him rising up to give me that look of knowing disapproval, while my mother calmly tells him to lie back down. It's pretty much the two of them. And here, well, a couple more. Here's a poem. There's a couple I really like to read. Well, one is called Forgetfulness. I'm going to read 3 poems, if that's okay. One's called, these poems seem to be paired up in my head because they were written separately, but one is about just having your memory pretty much wiped out, and the other one is about not being able to forget anything and just having memories pile up mercilessly. I don't know which would be worse, but to the first one is about forgetting, and it's called Forgetfulness. The name of the author is the first to go, followed obediently by the title, the plot, the heartbreaking conclusion, the entire novel, which suddenly becomes one you have never read, never even heard of. It is as if one by one the memories you used to harbor decided to retire to the southern hemisphere of the brain, to a little fishing village where there are no phones. Long ago, you kissed the names of the 9 muses goodbye, and you watched the quadratic equation pack its bag. And even now, as you memorize the order of the planets, something else is slipping away. A state flower, perhaps, the address of an uncle, the capital of Paraguay. Whatever it is you are struggling to remember, it is not poised on the tip of your tongue, not even lurking in some obscure corner of your spleen. It has floated away down a dark, mythological river whose name begins with an L. As far as you can recall, well on your own way to oblivion, where you will join those who have forgotten even how to swim and how to ride a bicycle. No wonder you rise in the middle of the night to look up the date of a famous battle in a book on war. No wonder the moon in the window seems to have drifted out of a love poem that you used to know by heart. Thank you so much. And this is sort of this, for me, a companion poem. It was written out of annoyance, really, because it was written, I wrote it back in the 20th century. Remember? You have your own memories, I'm sure. But one thing you will all remember is how fond we were of saying decades. We were in decade speak. We'd say the 60s. I know it's a very 80s thing, and what are you talking about? It's the 90s. As if I don't know. I never made sense of any of this stuff. It seemed like it made us think every 10 years at midnight everything changed. Fashion, music, morality, and it seemed like a very simplified way of trying to understand this difficult phantom called the past. And I call this poem Nostalgia because it seemed to me we were also made to feel a little bittersweet about the passing of these sort of cherished decades. Nostalgia. Remember the 1340s? We were doing a dance called the catapult. You always wore brown, the color craze of the decade. And I was draped in one of those capes that were popular, the ones with unicorns and pomegranates and needlework. Everyone would pause for beer and onions in the afternoon. And at night we would play a game called Find the Cow. Everything was hand-lettered back then, not like today. Where has the summer of 1572 gone? Brocade and sonnet marathons were the rage. We used to dress up in the flags of rival baronies and conquer one another in cold rooms of stone. Out on the dance floor, we were all doing the struggle, while your sister practiced the Daphne all alone in her room. These days, language seems transparent, a badly broken code. The 1790s will never come again. Childhood was big. People would take walks to the very tops of hills and write down what they saw in their journals without speaking. Our collars were high, our hats were extremely soft. We would surprise each other with alphabets made of twigs. It was a wonderful time to we sat still for our portraits. And I would love to return to 1901, if only for a moment, time enough to wind up a music box and do a few dance steps, or shoot me back to 1922 or 1941, or at least let me recapture the serenity of last month when we picked berries together and glided through afternoons in a canoe. Even this morning would be an improvement over the present. I was in the garden then, surrounded by the hum of bees and the Latin names of flowers, watching the early light flash off the slanted windows of the greenhouse and silver the limbs on the rows of dark hemlocks. As usual, I was thinking about the moments of the past, letting my memory rush over them like water rushing over the stones on the bottom of a stream. I was even thinking a little about the future, that place where people are doing a dance we cannot imagine, a dance whose name we can only guess. Thank you for being such a responsive and rather enormous audience. I appreciate that immensely. And I'll finish with a poem. Well, I don't know what to say to introduce this except that, you know, the true subject of poetry is death and misery, but misery leading to death. And if you're, you know, if you're majoring in English, you're majoring in death. Just write that in. Because, I mean, you know, if you get your anthology of poetry out, and if you got rid of all the poems that had anything to do with mortality, you would end up with the, you know, the Norton brochure of English poetry. So death is our thing as poets. It's what gets us going, gets us up in the morning. If not out the door, at least over to the window. And any time is good time to write a poem about death. You know, it's like Martha Stewart says, it's good at holiday time or any time. But a really good time to write a poem about death is when you're having a birthday. And a time when, if you're a poet, you're really almost required to write a poem about your own mortality is when you have a birthday that has a zero at the end of it. So most of these poems are kind of the same poem. They're basically kind of midlife crisis poems about turning 40 and 50 and so on. And so I wrote this little poem as a way of kind of getting at some of the darker and more despondent feelings that you find floating around in all those poems on personal mortality. And it's called On Turning 10. On Turning 10. The whole idea of it makes me feel like I'm coming down with something worse than any stomach ache or the headaches I get from reading in bad light, a kind of measles of the spirit, a mumps of the psyche. You tell me it is too early to be looking back, but that is because you have forgotten the perfect simplicity of being one, and the beautiful complexity introduced by two. But I can lie on my bed and remember every digit. At 4, I was an Arabian wizard. I could make myself invisible by drinking a glass of milk a certain way. At 7, I was a soldier. At 9, a prince. But now I am mostly at the window watching the late afternoon light. Back then it never fell so solemnly against the side of my treehouse, and my bicycle never leaned against the garage as it does today, all the dark blue speed drained out of me. This is beginning of sadness, I say to myself, as I walk through the universe in my sneakers, it is time to say goodbye to my imaginary friends, time to turn the first big number. It seems only yesterday I used to believe there was nothing under my skin but light. If you cut me, I would shine. But now, when I fall upon the sidewalks of life, I skin my knees, I bleed. Thank you.
We should take a moment to reshuffle yourselves. Some people might want to move up a little bit and think about what your questions might be. And then we'll have maybe about 10 minutes for a few questions. What is it?
Oh, I think
You knew that. You knew that. All right, a few questions.
So I just want the lights on me, apparently. Right. There, okay. So, well, thanks. If you do have a question or two, we could just kick poetry around a little bit. Anyone have something to ask? Yes. Who are my favorite poets? Well, they're just, I mean, too many mention, really. Having taught literature for so many years, you know, one thing you do get, see how I've got this chalk in my hand now. One thing you do get is to, you know, revisit all the poets. I mean, you know, Dickinson and Whitman and John Donne and George Herbert, and you know, you teach them semester after semester. So those are always kind of revolving in your head. I mean, it's a difficult question to talk about influence and favorite poets because it's very easy to construct your favorites or to construct influence after the fact. So, I mean, I could say, I could get my pipe out if you could still smoke pipes, and I'd say, you know, well, Yeats, of course. And, you know, but I mean, I was probably John Donne certainly was the first poet. See, I think importantly, it's very important if you want to be a writer that you become jealous. That's the main emotion for writers. You have to become jealous of other writers. Jealousy is the propeller that you don't see, that's below the surface, that is driving all writers. So you have to, the first poet I was ever jealous of was John Donne. And we read a poem of his called The Flea, and I couldn't believe how it managed to be funny and serious at the same time. And I couldn't write like that, and I still can't, but I wanted to imitate him. So, and I just think you know, but I was influenced by Looney Tune cartoons also. It's not just poetry. You know, I used to watch Warner Brothers cartoons all the time when I was a kid, and you know, it introduces you to this very malleable world where all sorts of stuff can happen. You can kind of pull a hedge clippers out of your pants, or you know, and these characters aren't even wearing pants. So I found it kind of imaginatively liberating to watch cartoons. So I would say John Donne and Daffy Duck would be basic influences. Yes, ma'am.
Beyond jealousy, do you have any poems that you've written from an angry place? I haven't been able to find them or hear that in your poetry.
That's a very good question about how do you include anger and maybe the baser emotions in your poetry. There's a very good book edited by X.J. Kennedy called The Tigers of Wrath, which is an anthology of poems that are of nasty poems, sarcastic, angry poems. And I do have some angry poems. I don't tend to read them in. Just want you to think I'm a nice guy and all that. But I have a number. I can recite to you a very, very short poem. I think that's quite angry. The title is it's a very, very short poem. The title is very important. It's called Refrigerator Light. Refrigerator Light. The minute she slams the door, I stop thinking about her. You want to hear another angry one? It's called Breaking Up. Like the nomadic dollar, I hand it to the cashier. You are off to other hands. Ooh. You don't want to hear too much of that. But it's a good, I do think we tend to put on a good face when we write poems. I mean, we tend to present, some of us do, a sort of, if not likable, a kind of honorable persona, or a persona maybe a little better than we actually are. And I think it's very good to think of anger and jealousy and really all the deadly sins as potential wells to draw on. Yes, sir.
Have any of your poems been translated into other languages that you understand, and are you satisfied with the translation?
Some of my poems have been translated. The only other language I understand decently enough to tell if the translation is accurate is Italian. And some of them have been well translated into Italian. But it's more fun in a way. There were a book, my poem just came out in Japanese, and it's really more fun just to completely have no idea what's being said there. So I don't know. So they are being translated into a number of languages, but Italian's the only one that I'd be able to follow, really. Yes, way back there. Yes, you.
I thought you should know that I've also stolen some of your work.
Good. Okay.
But I wanted to ask you, when I heard you speak a while back, you quoted someone else. You said poetry is the instinct. I'm not remembering exactly, something like the instinct against death crystallized.
Uh-huh.
And I was just wondering if you remember who it was that said that. I think you said somebody once said that.
I don't remember. I think I'm sorry, I remember the quote though. But I think, when you teach, you kind of swing like Tarzan from one quotation to another sometimes. And that's how you string your other people's thoughts together. That and a piece of chalk will get you tenure. I don't know. So it's a good quote. I can't tell you the attribution. I'm sorry. Way back, yes, ma'am.
Will you talk a moment about your experience with poetry as a high school student?
Well, when I was a high school student, poetry was not something that other students really admired in one. So you would be kicked and, oh, poetry boy, huh? Percy Bysshe, huh? So when I was in most of my poetry in high school was written very covertly, quietly on the sides. But I was still very driven as a high school kid to. I just thought poetry was a cool thing to do, and I still do. But this was not a view shared by my contemporaries. So I think one of the reasons when I became Lori and I felt sort of obliged to start some kind of national initiative, that perhaps that's why I really focused on getting poetry into high schools with this Poetry 180 program. But I think the attitudes toward poetry and the arts are much more forgiving and sympathetic, and at least in the high schools I tend to visit.
One more question.
Yeah, one more question. Right over there, sir.
You'll be glad to know that the Poetry 180 works. I used it last year with my high school students, and they really enjoyed it.
Great.
My question is, when you start to write a poem, do you intend for it to be humorous, or does humor just find its way in your poem?
Do I intend the poem to be humorous? Well, sometimes I don't know. I don't really intend it. I don't laugh at my own stuff, and I don't find it funny when I'm writing, because I really think of humor as being a kind of I think of humor as being epistemological. I think of it being a way of looking at things, being a lens that you look through rather than a sort of device to keep people amused. So I'm really kind of looking at something from an angle, and also, but I think that I'm trying to time the words right. Maybe that has to do with something has to do with comedy, but it's also, I think, frankly, a kind of seduction device that if you can get a reader to be amused or entertained or smile, then you can lead the reader into more difficult areas, more mysterious areas. So it's kind of a reader weakening device. Anyway, thanks so much for coming tonight.